Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we're breaking down the Thursday Night Football Showdown Slate, the Bengals versus the Browns, and I unfortunately have the honor of being a pretty big Browns fan, so I know I'm setting myself up for disappointment here, but I am looking forward to this game. I'm sure you guys are as well because it is football nonetheless, even though the Bengals versus the Browns doesn't sound like the most fun matchup in the world, but it's still football, so we're all going to be pumped up for it. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. Remember, all season long trying to help you guys become better NFL DFS players. And I cover other sports as well, including NASCAR each and every single weekend, and I also do live streams for NASCAR on race days. You can come in, ask me questions, or just come chat it up. Doesn't matter to me if that's your kind of thing. And I cover MLB each and every single day until the regular season ends. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button and turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. And if you don't follow me on social media, my handles are in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you want to support my content over on Patreon, always much appreciated. You can get access to all the extra content that I put out for NFL each and every single week, including my cheat sheets and my data sheets, which have a lot of information on there. It's pretty much every single thing I use the entire weekend. So everything's nice in there, and it's all color-coded and nice and neat, and it's got a bunch of columns for you. So it should be very helpful for you each and every single DFS weekend. And then you can hop into the Discord chat as well. So if you're interested, links down below. If not, hey, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. So we'll start off with the quarterbacks here. We have Joe Burrow at 10,800. Now, he wasn't super impressive in his first NFL start. I mean, he was the number one pick for a reason. Obviously, the guy's got a load of talent, and this Bengals offense got some talent as well. You got A.J. Green, John Ross, Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon, even Giovanni Bernard, and Seiji Uzama. I mean, he's kind of whatever, but he's there. But looking at Burrow's numbers in the first start, only 193 passing yards, no touchdowns, one interception. Did have a rushing touchdown, and 46 rushing yards was actually pretty nice to see if he's going to run the ball a little bit. But only 5.4 yards per attempt. It was pretty pedestrian, if I'm putting it nicely. Only a 66 QBR, which is kind of right on par with Baker Mayfield. If you guys watched Baker Mayfield play football week 1, it was not pretty at all. But Joe Burrow's fine here. It's a showdown slate, and this Browns defense is certainly beatable. I know it's Lamar Jackson, and I cannot compare Joe Burrow to Lamar Jackson. But Lamar had no problem at all just tearing up that defense. And he really didn't even do too much damage on the ground either. He only had 45 rushing yards, if I remember correctly. He had nearly 300 passing yards, though. And it's not like the Ravens receivers are that great. Now they got to deal with A.J. Green, John Ross, and Tyler Boyd. Much better receivers there, and I think the Browns defense is probably going to struggle quite a bit. I know the Bengals as a team are 6-point underdogs on the road here. It would not surprise me if they won this game, to be honest. I believe the Browns did open as around 7.5 or 7-point favorites, and the number has dipped a bit as money is coming in on the Bengals. And I don't blame them. I mean, watching the Browns play, I know they're playing one of the best teams in football in the Ravens, but I mean, they look like they were just not confident in the slightest. They looked awful. And, I mean, they look so good on paper. If you're just looking at the roster, you'd think they're going to win a bunch of games. But the Browns are just the Browns. They're cursed. I don't know what it is. They just play bad football no matter who's on the team. And this defense is dealing with quite a bit of injuries as well. They're going to be, for certain, missing Greedy Williams, Kevin Johnson, and Mac Wilson. And don't even get me started on the offensive side of the ball. Their whole entire offensive line's questionable for this game for the most part, as is Jarvis Landry, and Olivier Vernon is also questionable on the defensive line, so there'd be a boost if Vernon's out, and obviously you got the other guys out as well. So I think Joe Burrow, I mean, this could be his first good NFL game. I mean, I really don't see a reason why he can't have a good game here, and as 6-point underdogs, I'd expect him to maybe throw the ball quite a bit here, although I'm not really expecting them to be trailing too much. But I think 250-2 here is certainly reachable for Joe Burrow, and I know he's a bit pricey, but I think he's fine to put in the flex spot. I don't really think you have to captain him at that price tag. Then going down to Baker Mayfield, 10,200. I don't know what happened with the guy. I mean, I guess it was ever since he started doing commercials, he just fell off a cliff. But rookie year, he looked awesome. He looked like he was going to be the Browns quarterback of the future. And then in his sophomore season, trash. And then week 1 of his third year, absolute garbage. I don't know what it is. The guy just does not look good. He's not accurate anymore, and he just has happy feet in the pocket. And also another issue here is that literally his entire offensive line is questionable for the most part. I'll just read you the list here. We have Jedrick Wills, the first-round pick for the Browns. He's questionable with a shin injury. Then you have Jack Conklin, who they acquired in free agency, and then J.C. Tretter's questionable, the center, and then you have Chris Hubbard as well. So potentially, the entire offensive line could miss this game. I feel like they're not all going to, and they might all end up playing, but I'm not for certain as of right now. But it would definitely be a big downgrade for Baker Mayfield if any of those guys miss, especially if they all happen to miss. But the Browns do have a 25 implied team total here, and they are 6-point favorites. And I'd have to assume Baker's not going to be absolute trash here. I think he can have a viable game here. Now, it's going to hurt if Jarvis Landry doesn't play because he's been a pretty big safety valve for Baker Mayfield, but he's got all the weapons you can ask for. You got Jarvis Landry, potentially. You have Odell, who's supposed to be one of the best wide receivers in football. I mean, he's kind of taking himself out of that category these days, for sure. Certainly did last season, although he was playing hurt last year. But he's definitely not in that Julio Jones and DeAndre Hopkins category. Or tier, I should say. But Baker, I think he's fine. This is a pretty soft matchup versus the Bengals. Last season, they were 28th DVA versus the pass, allowed over 20 DK points per game to quarterbacks, over 250 passing yards, and 1.5 touchdowns per game. So I like the spot for Baker. He's also a little bit cheaper than Joe Burrow, and he has more experience than Joe Burrow, not by much, but he's still got a couple of years under his belt, unlike Joe Burrow here. He's playing at home as well. So I think Baker's okay. They did throw the ball 40 times last game. Now, they were trailing by 18 at the half. So, yeah, they had to throw the ball quite a bit. And as 6-point favorites, they're probably going to try to lean on Nick Chubb in this game. So, I definitely have some interest in the running backs, especially Nick Chubb as a 6-point favorite. But I think Baker's fine here. I think you can probably get a couple of touchdowns. So, he's probably someone you're just going to want to lock in your flex spot and just kind of eat it and hope he doesn't go look awful like he did last week. Now we'll move on to the running backs. Up top, we have Joe Mixon at 8,600. Didn't really have an impressive game week 1. If you're looking at his numbers, he had 19 rushing attempts, which is fine, but only 69 rushing yards, 3.6 yards per carry. And the really concerning thing was he only had 1 target for 2 receiving yards and only a 5.71% target share. So the lack of work in the passing game wasn't something I really liked, especially as an owner of Joe Mixon in my season-long team. But I think he'll be okay here. He actually destroyed the Browns last season. I believe he scored 3 touchdowns versus them, and I want to say he had around almost a 200-yard game versus the Browns. And, I mean, I don't know. It's just the Browns. I know I'm a fan of them, but they just seem to screw it up. And I think Joe Mixon's going to be fine here. They do have a pretty solid defensive line. If you're looking at the numbers last season, though, they were 26th DVA versus the run, allowed over 26 Draftkings points per game to running backs, over 100 rushing yards, nearly a rushing touchdown per game. So I like Joe Mixon. They have a pretty big offensive line versus defensive line disadvantage this week, according to PFF. But Joe Mixon's a very talented running back, and if they can get him involved a little bit in the air a little bit more, I think Joe Mixon is going to be totally fine here. And on a showdown slate at 8,600, I think he's a pretty easy plug-in, to be honest. I really like that price tag. So definitely like Joe Mixon, even though they are 6-point dogs. But I could honestly see the Bengals winning this game. But Nick Chubb at 7,600. This is a pretty tricky situation in the Browns' backfield. We saw Nick Chubb get 51% of the snaps last week, and Kareem Hunt was, I believe, around 47. But you have to keep in mind, the Browns were trailing for the majority of this game, and Nick Chubb is not really a pass-catching running back. That's kind of Kareem Hunt's role. So I feel like it's going to be more so. They're going to lean more so on Nick Chubb in this game than they are Kareem Hunt. But both guys, I mean, they're going to be involved. We know that. And Draftkings kind of priced them the same, so it doesn't really make it too easy to pick one. But with the Browns being 6-point favorites here, I think they're going to use a heavy dose of Nick Chubb here. We know how good he is. I mean, he was one of the best pure running backs, not really involved in the passing game, but just from the run standpoint, Nick Chubb is absolutely awesome, one of the higher-graded running backs in PFF the past couple of seasons. And look, the guy's just awesome. As a 6-point favorite, they should look to grind the ball here with Nick Chubb. I don't really think they trust Baker Mayfield's arm too much, so it makes sense just to keep the ball on the ground with Nick Chubb. Also get some quick passes out to Kareem Hunt, but I think Chubb should have a pretty solid game here. I think there's a good chance he finds the end zone. And this is a pretty good matchup versus the Bengals as well. One of the worst teams versus the run last season. They were 25th DVA versus the run last year. Allowed exactly the same amount of points as the Browns did, 26.8 DK points per game, over 110 rushing yards per game, and about 3/4 of a rushing touchdown per game as well. So I like Nick Chubb. I like the price point. I do think there's a good chance he can find the end zone in this game. And I think the snaps are going to go more towards Nick Chubb's favor this week, as long as they have the lead. Now, Kareem Hunt, 7,400. So I think I'm going to prefer Kareem Hunt in games where the Browns are underdogs. But again, it would not surprise me if the Browns just suck early on and they are playing from behind, because they are the Cleveland Browns, and Baker Mayfield is a hard guy to trust. But they used Kareem Hunt quite a bit last week. Now, again, they were trailing by a lot versus the Ravens, and I don't expect the Browns to be down 18 points at the half in this one. But Kareem Hunt looked good. He had 13 rushing attempts, which is more than Nick Chubb, 72 rushing yards. He also had 5 targets, only had 9 receiving yards, but he has 17% target share. So I think Kareem Hunt's fine. He's going to be involved in the passing game more than Nick Chubb is going to be. We know that. And this is a very good matchup on the ground, and these guys are both going to be used, but this is PPR scoring, so that makes Kareem Hunt definitely viable and appealing at 7,400. So I think both guys are good plays. I'm going to prefer Nick Chubb over Kareem Hunt just because I think they're going to rely on Nick Chubb on the ground here, but both are viable options, but I will give the slight lean to Nick Chubb. Then these guys, you're not really playing them for the most part. You can look at Giovanni Bernard, just because this is PPR scoring, and he did get 5 targets last week. He had 5 targets and for 21 receiving yards, and he had a 14% target share. So he's fine at 3,000 if you just need a salary relief guy, but nothing I'm going to be too excited about. But with this being a showdown slate, I think Giovanni at 3,000 is certainly playable if you need some salary relief. And you're not going to play Dearness Johnson at 1,000. I mean, it's going to be the Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt show, and Dearness Johnson was only in there at the end because they were just getting absolutely destroyed. So I wouldn't go any lower than Giovanni Bernard here, but he's fine at 3K because this is PPR scoring. And we'll move on to the wide receivers where we got quite a few big names here. And AJ Green, Odell, Landry, and Tyler Boyd. You could also throw John Ross in there as well. But AJ Green, 9,000. This is a pretty beatable Browns secondary. He's going to see quite a bit of Denzel Ward, but I mean, the Ravens receivers didn't have any issues with the Browns secondary last week either. I think Marquise Brown went over the 100-yard mark before halftime, if I remember correctly. But he still went over 100 yards if it was in the third quarter. And then we saw Willie Snead get into the end zone as well. Mark Andrews killed him over the middle. So yeah, I think we can use some Bengals pass catchers here for sure. And AJ Green's going to be the top option. He's pretty expensive at 9,000, but as a 6-point dog, I guess Vegas is expecting the Bengals to probably have to throw the ball quite a bit here. And I mean, AJ Green's obviously one of the more talented wide receivers in the NFL. I know he's a year removed from injury, but he had 9 targets last week, which was nice. Had a 70% weighted opportunity share, 45% market share of the team's air yards, and an ADOT of 14.7. So they were looking to get him the ball down the field, which is nice to see. He had 9 targets, like I mentioned, only 51 receiving yards, but I mean, they're going to get him the ball. He's AJ Green. He's obviously a red zone threat, and the Browns secondary did not look too opposing last week. And if you're looking at the numbers last year, they actually weren't too bad versus the pass. They were 17th DVA versus them and only allowed 30 Draftkings points per game to wide receivers and 138 receiving yards. But, I mean, they're dealing with quite a bit of injuries here. And Green's the top option on the Bengals, so I think he's fine if you got the money for him. Odell at 8,200. Again, I don't know what's happened with Odell, but he just has not looked very good. I know he was supposedly hurt last season and with the hip issue. But, man, the guy just can't put together a good game. Now, the targets were there, but I feel like his targets are more forced. Like, I don't know. I feel like Jarvis Landry, when he gets targets, they're more natural, but I feel like Baker's just trying to force feed Odell the ball, and it's just not really working. But I liked the volume he saw, but it only ended with 3 receptions. He had 10 targets, which is fine. I will take 10 targets. Only had 3 catches, though, for 22 yards. That was awful. 28% targets there, though. 71% weighted opportunity share. 129 air yards. They were getting the ball down the field. At least they were trying to. A dot of 12.9 and a 40% share of the team's air yards. And this is a beatable Bengals secondary for sure. And look, I like him at 8,200. This is a showdown slate. We know Odell has slate breaking upside. I remember last year when he was playing the Jets on, I believe it was Monday Night Football, if I remember correctly. It was either Thursday Night Football or Monday Night Football. But Odell, he took a 90-yard slant to the house, and that's exactly what he can do. He wasn't like too explosive that entire game, but again, he is capable of that 90-yard slant to the house, and he could also make a crazy one-handed catch that goes for 60 yards. It's just things that Odell can do. I know he hasn't really done it consistently, but he's got the upside for it. On a showdown slate, we're looking for guys with upside, and I think he's fairly priced at 8,200. And also keep in mind that Jarvis Landry is questionable in this game, and if Jarvis Landry misses, that's going to be even more targets for Odell. Now the defense will be able to key in on him more, but he's still a very talented wide receiver in a beatable matchup. So I do like Odell. I think the price point is fine. Jarvis Landry at 8,000. He feels a bit safer than Odell as long as he plays. Obviously, if he doesn't play, we can't really use him. That would just be a boost to Rashard Higgins and Kadero Hodges if he happens to miss. But I'm going to assume Landry plays because he's not one to miss a game. So I'm assuming he plays. He was limited today. He was a DMP earlier in the week, and then he was limited. So I'm assuming he's trending towards playing. But I do like Jarvis Landry at 8,000. He's more in the safer options here. He's not going to be targeted down the field too much, but he did have an ADOT of 12.7 last game, which is only 0.2 behind Odell. He had 61 receiving yards on 6 targets, only a 17% target share, and obviously lower numbers than Odell. But I like Landry. He's a safe option. He's certainly someone that can get into the end zone. And this is a beatable matchup, so I like both of these guys. Odell's got the higher upside in my opinion, but Jarvis is probably just a bit safer, assuming he plays. Tyler Boyd at 7,000. If you're looking at the targets he had in week 1, it was only 5 targets for 33 receiving yards, didn't get into the end zone. And he was not targeted down the field at all. He only had 35 air yards and an ADOT of 7. But It's kind of like an Odell Landry situation where Tyler Boyd is going to be the underneath guy. I mean, I know he feels safe-ish now, but then AJ Green and Odell got the big upside. Meanwhile, Landry and Boyd, they're kind of like they're your possession wide receivers. But it's a showdown slate. This is a beatable secondary. And if Denzel Ward's going to be following AJ Green on the field, I mean, Tyler Boyd's going to have a pretty soft matchup no matter who he's facing. So I think Boyd's fine at only 7,000. Certainly he's going to be in a pretty good spot here versus the Cleveland secondary that is banged up. John Ross at 5,200. He also saw 5 targets last week, only had 7 receiving yards, but he's a guy that can go down the field and burn a defense deep. And that's something the Browns like to do. They love giving up big plays. We saw Marquise Brown beat him on a long ball last week early on. But he's a very boomer bust play. But on a showdown slate, I mean, you're kind of hunting for those boomer bust plays. If they go boom, you're going to be looking pretty good on showdowns. T. Higgins, he saw around 20% of the snaps last week, but I just don't really think you can trust him to really get the ball here. So I think he's a fine, just a pass. And when you got Auden Tate there, Mike Thomas, Tyler Boyd, AJ Green, he seems to be behind. So it doesn't really feel too comfortable paying $3,200 for T. Higgins. Peoples-Jones, I don't really think you can play him either. Now, if Jarvis Landry happens to miss, maybe, just maybe he'd be viable. But again, it's not something you can really trust, especially as being a rookie with no preseason. Auden Tate, 2,200. Again, I mean, these guys, and pretty much after Tyler Boyd and AJ Green and John Ross, you're kind of just hoping for maybe a target or two. But, I mean, it's fine on a showdown slate, but you can't really expect much. He was not targeted in last game. Rashard Higgins at 1,800. I think he actually becomes pretty interesting if Jarvis Landry happens to miss. Him and Baker Mayfield have always had a good connection. I mean, as being a Browns fan, they always talk up the Rashard Higgins and Baker Mayfield connection, which I know it's not really much of a connection on the field, but just overall, they've got a pretty good chemistry. He only had 1 target in the last game, but again, if Jarvis Landry happens to miss, I'm not expecting him to miss, but if he happens to miss, obviously he would see a little bit of a bump, and especially in playing time and targets, hopefully as well. Alex Erickson, you're not playing him. I really don't think you can, especially at 1,400. Hodge, I apologize. But he's only 400. He actually had 3 targets in the last game, and keep in mind they were getting blown out, but he's actually someone last season that saw the field a little bit at random times, and at only 400, I mean, if Jarvis Landry misses, that's not too bad. Even if Jarvis Landry even if Jarvis Landry plays, which I think he's going to, I don't think Hodge is the worst play at 400 because he actually sometimes sees the field. So at 400, it's kind of just a nice dart throw if you want to fit in all the studs, but not someone I feel comfortable with. Mike Thomas, he's only 200, and he actually saw 3 targets last week and had 17 receiving yards. I know it's nothing amazing. He only had a target share of 8%, but at 200, you're just hoping he catches 1 ball, and you're looking pretty good. So I think he's an okay, just absolute pump play. I mean, only $200. You don't really need much at all. And I did find on the last showdown slate with the Rams and the Cowboys, I played Gerald Everett. I think he was only 1,000. He caught 1 ball for 9 yards, and I cashed that slate. So you don't need much at 200. I think Mike Thomas is somewhat interesting. And then JoJo Natson, I think he can just pass there. And then going down to the tight end position, we have Austin Hooper at 6,800, easily the best tight end on this slate. And also, the Browns are going to have David Njoku on the IL, I was going to say IL because of baseball, on the IR. So that's just going to firmly put Austin Hooper for all the tight end targets for the most part. I mean, yeah, you have Steven Carlson and Harrison Bryant, but he'll be the guy here. And I know, like I mentioned it before, but if Jarvis Landry happens to miss, that's just going to be a bump for all the other guys, like obviously Odell, Austin Hooper, Rashard Higgins, Hodge, and even some of the other guys as well. So don't mind Hooper here. If you're looking at the matchup versus Cincinnati, they were pretty beatable versus the pass last season. If we're looking specifically versus tight ends, they allowed 50 receiving yards per game, 0.38 touchdowns, and 11 DraftKings points. Nothing too crazy, but Austin Hooper, he's got those soft hands. You can trust him to catch the ball. Now, he wasn't really involved in the last game. Only 2 targets, 15 receiving yards, and a 5% target share with an ADOT 7.5 and only 15 air yards. But I think there's a decent chance he can get into the end zone. Baker Mayfield does like using his tight ends, so I think Hooper's okay, but he's a little bit pricey at nearly $7,000, to be honest. CJ Uzomah here at $5,000, the clear tight end one for the Bengals. He had 5 targets last week for 45 receiving yards, a target share of 14%, and 46 air yards, and an ADOT of 9.2. Not too bad if you're looking at how the Browns did versus tight ends last year. They allowed 14 DK points per game, 52 receiving yards, and 0.63 touchdowns per game as well. And they were 17th DVOA versus the pass. And we just saw Mark Andrews as a tight end just kind of destroy the Browns. He scored 2 touchdowns, and the 1 touchdown, There wasn't even any Browns defender in the area, and this was near the end zone. They just let Mark Andrews be wide open just to catch a nice, easy touchdown, and the Browns tend to do stupid things like that. They forget to cover guys, so I think Uzama's got a decent chance of scoring a touchdown. I don't love paying $5,000 for CJ Uzama, but sorry to pause the video really quick, but I think we're going down to Drew Sample because we're going to skip over Njoku because he's obviously not playing. But Sample, he had, one target last week? It's just not something you really put too much stock in. I'd rather play Harrison Bryant or Steven Carlson with the Njoku injury, so I'll probably pass on Sample, but you never know. Maybe you can get a cheap, just random touchdown at $400, but not something I would really trust. But Steven Carlson and Harrison Bryant, this Browns offense is not afraid to use 2 tight ends, and that's something Stefanski did a lot in Minnesota. So I think these guys are certainly viable, and they're only $200, and I feel like one of these guys is going to at least have a couple of catches here because they can't go to Hooper each and every single time, and I don't mind it at all. At only $200, Harrison Bryant in the first game, he had 2 targets, only 5 receiving yards, but if you can give me two targets, even with Njoku playing, that's not too bad. Njoku had 3 targets in the first game, so if you kind of split that up between Carlson and Harrison Bryant, maybe throw in a couple of extra targets because Hooper only got 2, and I'd have to assume Hooper's going to be around 5 targets, if not. And then I think Carlson and Harrison Bryant. I feel like Harrison Bryant's the more likely guy to get targets. I feel like Carlson's going to be more of a blocker. But if you can give those guys maybe like 3 to 5 targets split up at $200, just give me a catch and maybe get a lucky touchdown. I mean, Baker Mayfield's not afraid to throw the ball to tight ends, especially in the red zone. So I think these guys are both viable for sure at only the bare minimum of $200. I prefer Bryant over Carlson, but both guys are eligible to catch a random touchdown in the end zone. So there's plenty of value here if you want to spend up, because I do think, these guys have a decent shot of somehow finding the end zone. Then going down to defenses, we have the Browns and the Bengals. I don't really expect either offense to really have a crazy good game, so I think actually both defenses are viable here. Baker Mayfield loves to turn the ball over. Joe Burrow is a rookie quarterback making his second start ever, and he's going to be on the road. So, you could make a case for playing both defenses, but it's kind of hard to project defenses. I would prefer the Browns just because they are 6-point favorites at home. The Bengals have a rookie quarterback under center, but you can make a case for either. And then the kickers, they're the kickers. I don't really think you have to go in depth here. You can't really project kickers for the most part. I guess I would prefer Parkey just because the Browns have a higher team total. But the Browns kickers seem to have awful luck. I can't remember the last time they've had a good kicker besides Phil Dawson. I can't remember the last time they had a good kicker, Phil Dawson. Besides Phil Dawson, it's been a rough go for quite a while. They draft kickers. They don't end up working out. They cut them. It's been ugly for kickers, and last time Parkey, the Bears, the double doink mishap with him. Man, I don't know. They're kickers. They're safe options, I guess. I wish Parkey was not $4,400, but they are what they are. They can get you some points if the team scores some touchdowns or if they can get some field goals as well. And the Browns and Bengals, I could see them kicking a lot of field goals here. They're not great offenses. I wouldn't say they're awful offenses, so I could see a lot of drives stalling around the 20 to 40 yard line, which could lead to some field goals. So they're both viable, but nothing to get excited about. But I think that's going to be it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to get out of here. Going to make some MLB lineups as it's 6:30, so I got lock in about 30 minutes. So I'm going to head out of here, and I hope you guys enjoy the game, and go Browns.